Simple drawing mistakes. Today I'm going to talk about a few simple tweaks within your drawing and studio space that can really maximize your efficiency as a draftsperson. You can see here that I'm just doing a drawing of some well-loved plushies. When I first started out, I entered the academic studio space and was presented with a sawhorse style easel. These are typically about 3.5 feet tall. They're about 4 feet long, and you straddle them almost like you're riding a motorcycle. And you lean your drawing board as you see here. As an instructor, I really dislike this style of setup. The first point is that you are not observing your subject directly. At first glance, you think you are because your view is unimpeded. However, every single time that you look down at your drawing to make a mark, you no longer have your subject in a reference. You have to translate that information from the three-dimensional world to the two-dimensional picture plane. You're doing it as you're moving your head, you're moving your arms. There's just a lot of potential for mistranslation of information to go from life into the drawing. Now you can see here that I am attempting to draw at a 1-to-1 scale. That the figures of the plushies in the drawing are very close to the size that they are in real life. They're actually slightly larger in the finished drawing, which you will see at the end of the video. But as I'm drawing this, due to my physical position sitting on the floor as I would on one of those easels, I'm making a lot of mistakes. And at this point in my art career, it's very telling how many mistakes that I'm actually making versus my experience. I'm not comfortable in this position. I cannot sustain the drawing over a long period of time. So I have to fight with not only the mistranslation of information as I'm making the drawing from the subject, but I'm also fighting my own body. If you look very closely at the proportions of these figures, you'll notice that I've made quite a few corrections in the proportion of the heads versus the total height. And this is very important when you're working at an angle as opposed to working as vertically as possible in a typical site-sized setup. Normally in that setup, you would have your easel to the left or the right of your subject, and you would have a frame of reference that is literally a 1-to-1 ratio between your work and the subject. That vertical surface in the site-side method allows the proportions and the overall shapes of the forms when you are applying the block-in step to be nearly identical. But since here, as again shown in this video, that the drawing easel is at such a strong angle that the distance from the top line of the heads of the plushie in the drawing to essentially their shoulders is longer than the visual distance of the subject in life. So as you look at the subject, you believe it to be some ratio of height. But when you draw the line on the page to apply that same ratio, you are actually drawing a proportion that is skewed because the physical distance of the angled surface is longer than the vertical surface. And this can completely have a domino effect or a butterfly effect upon your whole drawing. If the block-in and those localities based upon the block-in step, where you put just basic shapes of the largest forms, will continue to grow in inaccuracy the closer and closer you get toward the end of your drawing. And this can be devastating. One, it's very frustrating as your drawing progresses because certain parts will be correct, other parts will not be correct. And once you take a break and come back to your subject to continue working, you won't understand why those pieces don't make sense as a whole, even though a particular local shape might make sense and look okay. It's very important when you begin a drawing to question every mark that you make to avoid that situation. But since the drawing board itself is already undermining that process, there's really no way for those mistakes to be avoided drawing in this sort of setup. You can see I've made quite a few corrections to the shape of the plushie on the left because of this situation. With every drawing, there's always a lot of cleanup as you push and you pull information. You observe the subject, you understand the proportions of the forms, how light is traveling across different, in this case, textures across those forms, and how the light is interacting with the rest of the room. One thing I like to tell all my students is that drawing is a slow cook process. To use an analogy, it's not fast food. You need to take the time and the care, one, to have your ingredients, that would be your materials. But when you go about making observations, you want to do it with a lot of care. You don't want to bulldoze the process. I like to say that a good drawing is like your favorite meal from an amazing chef, or Thanksgiving. The flavors, the rubs, the roasting, the basting, as you work on particular areas within the drawing. So all the elements of drawing have sort of this correlation to cooking. The tools we use are important, but you can see that even the drawing stick that I'm using here to keep my hand up off of the paper surface is very basic. We don't necessarily need very expensive items to make good and qualitative art. But what is important is to be aware of a proper setup and the time and the dedication to see the process through. So let's speed this up 500%. I had originally wanted to show you the entire drawing process, but much to my horror, I accidentally deleted the rest of the source material. But I will say this was a fun experiment, though not one that you should do in any practiced still life. You can see here this is the finished version of this demonstration, and the camera has manipulated the effects a bit. The person I did this for, they were rather happy with the result, and I can see multiple mistakes in this because of the physical orientation of the drawing setup. That setup was completely changed and moved into a proper site-sized setup later after this part of the video was filmed, and you can see that the fabric on the table that these two plushies sit on is now completely different. And to be perfectly honest, there is a bit of disjointedness between the subject and the environment in which they exist within the picture plane. So next time you start a drawing or an artwork, and you're working from direct observation in a traditional method, don't set yourself up for failure and frustration. Be mindful of your drawing position within your studio space. So what have we learned? In summary, ensure that your drawing position is stable. That means you should be drawing sitting or standing in a comfortable position that can be returned to again and again across the entire project. Number two, ensure that your drawing surface is nearly 90 degrees. We don't ever want our paper or our canvas at a severe angle. I would say anything more than 5 degrees is going to be problematic. Number 3, observe more than you actually draw. Number 4, use the one stroke, one mark method. I tell my beginning students to pretend that their charcoal is like a lightsaber and that they only have one stroke per line, especially when they are building the drawing from the block into the local shapes. And connected to that process, marks should begin as angles. Large swoopy lines may be great for gesture drawing and practiced sketches, but if you really want to keep things accurate, understand what I call the angle of approach for each stroke. That includes angles on the flat 2D surface, but also the warped perspective of your subject within the 3D space as well. Number 6, verify your marks with intent. A mark should never be made that is uncertain. Number 7, slow cook the production. And finally, number 8, use the sight-sized method for the most accurate still lifes possible. Hopefully this was helpful. You can always find out more information, including blog posts and more videos over at my website, ripfastart.works. And remember too, that art is of a divine order through the power of creation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.